Hi there, my name is Cameron, and I am the guy behind Motion Science. And I have decided to put together this free training series on what I'm calling idea to execution. I get asked all the time, how do you get from an idea that a client gives you or an idea that you've got in your mind? How do you get that to the design phase and to the motion phase and finally like to a finished piece that you're proud of? So I get asked that so many times, I decided, hey, I'm going to put together a free training series and show you how I do this. So I want to jump right into this. I don't want to waste any time on this. I want to just get to the meat of this. I'm going to spread this out over several videos because it is a lot of content. But I hope you enjoy this series. So, like I said, who am I? I'm Cameron. I'm the guy behind Motion Science. And I started Motion Science several years ago because I saw a void in the training area of motion design that wasn't quite being filled. There's a lot of great resources out there, but what I was doing as a motion designer, I wasn't seeing a lot of that being taught. So that's why I'm here. That's what I'm teaching through Motion Science. And just to give a little background on who I am. I never went to art school. I never studied art in an early education in high school, nothing like that. I never took a drawing class. I can't draw. I can draw digitally on a computer. I can't draw by pencil and paper. I always have a lot of respect for those guys that can do that kind of stuff. So I never took a design class. I never took a photography class. I always had kind of a knack for making short films. I was always really into it, and at one point I wanted to be a director. But back in the day when motion graphics kind of burst onto the scene, I was working for a TV station, a really small TV station, and I saw After Effects, which was called COSA back then, and it really grabbed my attention. And so I started teaching myself everything I could about After Effects. So I became an animator first, which I wouldn't necessarily suggest. I see that a lot of motion designers, they know how to animate really well, but they don't know how to design. Okay. And as a motion designer, we should all know some aspects of design, right? You have to understand what makes something look good. It's great if you can make it move really well, but we should also understand how to design it. So I just taught myself how to design. One day I was hired by a company, kind of a high profile company, and they asked me if I could design some style frames, and I was scared to death to do it. But I created them. They were super impressed. And before you knew it, I was making more and more designs. So it's taken me a long time to learn how to become a motion designer. But I want to show you what I've learned because, like I said, I never went to art school, and now I'm teaching people how to create motion design at a high level. And the feedback I've gotten over the years has been incredible. So I know I'm doing something right. So my methods aren't necessarily, like I said, taught in school in a traditional sense, but they work, right? And I continue to get hired for freelance work, motion design work for high profile clients. So let's start an exercise. So this first video, I've told you enough about me. I know that a lot of you have experienced problems where you can't get ideas into executions to final finished pieces. So that's what I'm going to show you. So let's just dive right in. So when you work with a client, a lot of times you can get a lot of different creative briefs. Okay. Sometimes the client will send you a creative brief that has a lot of detailed information. It could be pages and pages of information, from colors to typography to what you should be using to tons and tons of reference. Sometimes you'll get one sentence. Sometimes you'll get one page. So what I'm going to do with this exercise is I'm going to give you one page. Okay. And this is a creative brief for a client for a TV show called Red Robot. So right here we have Red Robot creative brief. Okay. And deliverable request from the client. They want a titles design / motion test. They want it to be under 10 seconds in length, 16:9 format, 24 frames per second. Use 3 actor names, which are Nina Gates, Gina Black, and Toby Sykes. So that's the initial deliverable request that the client is asking for us. If you don't know what a motion test is, it's just where a client's looking for ideas, for ways to directions to take a project in. So a motion test is never really finalized. It's just a small piece. It gives creative directors and companies ideas of where they can go with what they're looking for. So that's what we're going to create. It's going to be under 10 seconds in length, 16:9, 24 frames per second, and 3 actor names. The concept from the client says Red Robot is a television series that takes place in a not so distant utopian future with ties to the ancient past. So that concept line is a little bit unknown, I guess you could say. It's a little bit intriguing, excuse me, because there's not a lot of information there. Like I said, sometimes a client will give you a ton of information here for the concept. Other times it could be one sentence or it could be a couple words. You never know. So this is very open to interpretation, which again, a lot of times with motion tests, things are open to interpretation. As a designer, if you give a creative brief like this to, let's say, 5 or 6 motion designers, you're going to come get 5 or 6 totally different pieces back from each of those designers because it's their take on what the client is looking for. So that's what's so great about motion tests. Okay, items to consider: sacred geometry. If you don't know what that is, we'll take a look at it in just a second. Symmetry, distressed texture, glitch, provided music track. So the client is providing us a music track to base this on. And then texture. And then for tone, mood, and style, it's futuristic, glitchy, dark and moody, which I love, analog, and duo color palette. Okay, so when we get a creative brief like this, a lot of times the client will also send us different pieces to mess around with, right? To explore. So the first thing we're gonna look at here is we are going to look at or listen to the music track, because right here we saw provided music track. So let's just play this, back it up. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and stop it there. That's a minute. It's a 2 to 3 minute song here, so we don't need to listen to all of it. You get the idea. Okay, it's called synthwave cyberpunk. It's dark and moody for sure, futuristic for sure. It's got an analog feel to it. I can hear texture in the music, right? Um, Distressed, glitchiness, all that great stuff. So this is a music track provided to us from the client. It's awesome. I love it. Okay, so we've taken a look at the creative brief, we've listened to the music track. So now let me show you what we're actually going to create. It's going to be something along these lines. And I'll play it one more time. Okay, so if you want to learn how to get from this creative brief to this finished piece, I invite you to stick around for the next several videos, and we're going to create this piece. So how would I create this? Where do I start, right? Well, always go back to the creative brief and I start really just looking at this and kind of dissecting it. Now, without diving too deep into this, without taking up hours and hours of your time to create this stuff, I'm going to move kind of fast and I'm going to kind of, briefly go over some of these things and not really dive into all of them because we don't have a lot of time to do this. So what I would do next is I would study this creative brief and then I would go into something like Pinterest. Okay. I've got a motion science Pinterest page that's got tons and tons of boards. Okay. And in these boards, I've divided them into different categories. Things like digital texture, things like glitch, things like retro, geometry, science design. Okay. Now, something like this project, the retro stuff's not going to work so well. So I'm going to go ahead and close that out. This isn't necessarily what I'm looking for, but just to give you an idea, if I was to go back into my motion science account here and look at my boards, I've got a lot of boards here, right? You can see typography, digital texture, retro, color, studio logos. It goes on and on and on. I divide them all up into different boards, and I've got a lot of hidden boards as well that I keep for myself. So how I would do it is I would start looking for inspiration, right? Based on the creative brief, I would start kind of pulling assets and saying, okay, what do I like about this particular piece? Like, for example, this piece right here. This is a GIF, right? So this is really interesting digital texture. I like the the noise that's going on. I like the different chromatic aberration that's happening and the image splitting apart and glitching out. It's really, really interesting. And I really look at these examples and I say, okay, well, what about it is what why do I feel like it's a strong piece, you know? And like I just told you, it's the noise, it's the chromatic aberration, it's the image splitting apart. And then maybe I'd go into an image like this and I'd say, what do I love about this? Well, I love all of the displacement mapping that's going on. I love the digital texture that I see. And I love the way that it's on the sides, it's very narrow digital texture, but in the center, it's a very wide digital texture. Let me jump to another board. So glitch, here's a glitch board here. What do I love about this? I love on this example, the use of color with glitch, right? Again, we've got chromatic aberration. We've got image splitting apart with the greens and the reds splitting apart. We've got greens or blues splitting off of the reds here. So it's creating like this blue halo effect. Really strong composition as well with the shape over the statue here. Let me jump into another board here. That's the main board. Okay, geometry. So again, this is an image that was highly inspirational to me when I started creating this project, and that this image is based on sacred geometry and symmetry. Okay, we just looked at glitch. We looked at some distressed texture. We obviously listened to the music track, but sacred geometry and symmetry are images like this. This is what they mean to me as a designer. Okay, and you can see I've got this geometry board here, and it's got all types of just really interesting geometry going on, and I just absolutely love this stuff. Here's one for science design. Again, it's a lot of symmetry going on. If you look, let's pull this one up. You know how the lines just repeat themselves and create this perfect symmetry up and down. So really, really great stuff. This is where I would start, okay? And I start pulling references. I start pulling assets and looking at design and motion and seeing what really stands out to me, okay? So after I've got that, the next step I'm going to do is I'm going to find an image that is going to be very inspirational to me to start designing some pieces. So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to jump into After Effects here. And inside of After Effects, I'm going to create a new composition. I'm going to make it 200 frames long because this needs to be between 6 and 10 seconds. 200 frames is plenty. It's 24 frames a second, 1920 by 1080. And we're going to call this Red Robot. So this is going to be our main composition. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do, and this is how I like to work, and there's so many different ways you can do this, but this is the process I'm going to use for this, is I'm going to actually design inside of After Effects. I prefer to design inside of After Effects. It's much easier to me than designing inside of Photoshop because I have a lot more effects and plugins, and if I can keep it here in After Effects, why not design it here? Because once I'm ready to put it into motion, it's all here, ready to go. So let's just drag in this music track. I've got it pulled in here, and I'm just going to go ahead and hit LL on my keyboard and start finding an endpoint that I want to start working with. Okay, so I know that I've listened to this and I like it around 987 frames into this. So if I hit the period on my keypad, I'll be able to hear this. So I'm going to stop it about here, about 160 frames into it. Yeah, so that works for me. So if I was to pull up my calculator here really quickly, and I say if I'm 160 frames in and I divide that by 24 frames a second, I'm at just over 6.5 seconds long. So I'm going to back this up just a little bit so it sounds a little more pleasant to me. So let's try this. Yeah, so that sounds good. I'm going to lock that layer. There we go. Okay, so now I've got the music in here. I need to actually set some edit points. I like to just create some very simple edit points of where I want my scenes to be. So I'm going to hit. So you hear that snare happen right there. So I'm going to hit Shift 1 to create a marker. I want something to happen probably right here. I also want something to happen here on this next snare. So I'm going to hit Shift 3. Something right there. And right there. So now if I play it back and I look at these markers and imagine a scene happening during these times, I think it'll work. And then right here is actually scene 6, and this is just my simple cut to black. So I'm gonna say cut to black, and we're gonna make this pure black. There, and I'm going to set my endpoint there, and I can lock this layer because we go black right here and we're good to go. On this one, we don't hear, on number 2, we don't hear a snare, right? We don't hear like a hit, but I also hear some music going on there that I want to see something happening. So that's what I do. So now I've got a very rough outline of where I want things to happen at. So at this point, I'm going to start designing elements and just kind of dropping them in. Next I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new composition, and I'm going to make it a square composition, 2000 by 2000, and it doesn't need to be the full length. Let's just make it, let's make it 40. Well, let's make it an even number. Let's make it 60. Okay. And we're actually going to call this, Sacred Geo. I've imported an Illustrator file that I really like for this example as reference. Okay, so you can't see anything here, it's black. So I'm gonna say let's go to channel, and we'll go channel invert, and there we go, there it is. So I'm gonna go ahead and scale it up so I can see it, and I am going to turn on my grid. And I need to set my grid to something like 500. Let's see how that looks. Let's go actually even smaller. Let's go into 250. Perfect. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale this guy up so he kind of lines up with these points throughout here. So maybe somewhere in here, maybe actually just go up to 500. Something like this. And you can see by looking at this image, it's not totally square, right? Like the center point here is off. The center point appears off to the side. So that's okay. We're just going to use this as reference. And I'm going to start recreating this inside of After Effects. The reason I'm doing this is if I opened this up inside of Illustrator, these are not strokes. These are fills, okay? And I want to be able to take something like a trim path and just do a simple trim on it and make the lines just kind of draw on their own way. And I can't do that with fills. So how we're going to do this, we're going to go ahead and just create a new shape layer. Okay, and before I get too far, I'm going to go ahead and drop the transparency of this reference down to something like 20%, and then we'll go ahead and lock it there. Okay. So this first shape layer, I want to create the circles. So I'm just going to select circle, double click, and there it is. It's really big. I'm going to open up the ellipse here, and I'm going to drop this down to 250 pixels. And there you can see, so this is perfectly centered. And like I said, you can see that the reference is not quite so centered in its design. Okay, so next we are going to select the ellipse, go to add, and we're going to set repeater. And there we go. And we're going to set this to maybe 2 copies here. So we've got 2 copies, transform repeater, and I'm going to go, let's say 250. Okay, not 250, let's go 500. And there we go. So because we set up the grids to be 250 pixels, this is a 2000 by 2000 composition. Pretty much I'm trying to stay in a 250 pixel to 500 pixel movement to keep everything very uniform. So 500 pixels kind of lines this guy up here with these. Works good enough for me for right now. Let's go ahead and add a second repeater here. And to this one, I'm going to say, let's make this 6 copies. And we don't want the position to be changed here. So I'm going to go back to 0 there, and I'm going to turn the rotation up to about 60. Perfect. There we go. That looks really good. Okay, I like that. So that is going to be called our circles. I'll go ahead and close that up. And to get these circles to really line up with these guys here, all I have to do is hit R for rotation, and I just have to rotate these guys something like so. So now I've got the ones at the top and the bottom perfectly lined up with these grid points. These are looking pretty good as well. Close that. I'm going to make another new shape layer. And I'm going to double click the circle again. And to this one, I'm going to bring down the size to something. Remember I said I want to work with the 250 to 500 pixel range. So if we do 1250 pixels here, perfect. See how easily it lines up with the outside of these circles? So that's perfect. We're going to call this big circle. And let's do another shape layer. And we're going to call this triangles. And for this one, to make a triangle, all we have to do is go to the star tool, and we'll double click that star tool, and we'll open up the polystar, and we'll say, hey, I don't want you to be a 5-point star. I want you to be a 3-point star, which is a triangle. And I'm going to bring the inner radius down to 250 and the outer radius to 500. There we go. Perfect. Let's set a repeater here, and let's just rotate this repeater. Let's turn off position. And that is one thing that drives me crazy, is that it always, whenever you add a repeater, it defaults to offset the position by 100, which can throw people off. So there we go. It looks awesome. And then let's create inside of this triangle, let's just create another polystar. And if I can just hit Command D, it's going to duplicate it. And I'm going to turn off this repeater. And all I'm going to do with this polystar is just rotate it. Let's see here. Let's do rotation 180 degrees. And I lied. Let's go ahead and scale it by 50%. And there we go. There's our inner triangle. Perfect. And let's go to new shape layer again. And let's call them polygon. And for the polygon, we're going to go up here to the polygon tool and double click. And to this one, let's make it 6-pointed. And let's go ahead and bring down the outer radius here. And if we go to 500, perfect. And we're going to repeat this one. And for the repeater, it's just going to be 2 copies. And we're going to scale down this second copy here. And take the position to 0, scale it to 50%. Perfect. Real close. All we have left now is these inner lines here, these lines that cross each other. And that's really simple. We're going to create one more shape layer, and we will call these lines. And the lines are a star. So we'll double click there, and we will go in and we will say, okay, we want this to be 6 points. Inner radius should be 0. And as we do that, you can see they all draw in. They collapse on themselves. Now we've got these lines, and we are going to bring the outer radius down to about, 500. And you can see the advantage here of working with even numbers, right? So now, if I turn off the reference, we've got this really cool sacred geometry to work with based on the creative brief and the inspiration we pulled from Pinterest. Okay, so I want to work with one other piece of sacred geometry. I don't want to use just this one element throughout the entire piece. It'd get a little too repetitive. So I think it'd be interesting to use one other piece. And for that, I'm going to create another new composition, and it's the same thing. And we'll call this Sacred Geo 2. There it is. Hit OK. And we're going to make this one a little bit differently. So we're going to jump into Illustrator here. And I've got this geometry that I pulled in from somewhere off of the web. I don't remember exactly where I got it, but I found it and I really liked it. Again, the same problem is it's a fill, right? These are filled. They're not, there's no strokes going on here. So a stroke, the reason I want to use that is for trim paths, which I'll get into in the next video and you'll see why. But what I like to do for examples like this, if I have something like this shape and I want to use it in After Effects, I love to use Overlord. Okay, and this is a I almost said free. It's not free. It's a script on aescripts.com. It's really awesome and it helps to push Illustrator shapes into After Effects. There's other things you can do with it, but that's mostly what I use it for. So I'm going to go to my window extensions, load up Overlord. I've noticed that I have to have this window open for this to work. Go back in Illustrator and I just make sure I select everything and I simply click this button, push selection to AE, and boom, there it is. It's inside of AE. I'm actually going to scale it up a little bit here. So there's my second Sacred Geo, and you can see how quickly I brought this guy in here. But again, the next video, we're going to talk about animating and things like that. This one's just about the design aspect. So what I want to do here, I also want to add some typography. I'm just kind of laying out, I've got my general scene outline here. I've got my music in. I want to lay out some of my elements and kind of bring them in here and just kind of get a very rough assemble going on. So to do that, I'm going to bring in Sacred Geo 1 and I'm going to probably make Sacred Geo 1 be the second scene here. And I'm just going to shorten this and kind of bring it like that. Okay, perfect. So Sacred Geo 2 will be our opening scene. And I'm going to bring that in here like so. So there's Sacred Geo 2, there's Sacred Geo 1. Over Sacred Geo 1, I want to put some typography. So I'm just going to take my selection tool and I'm going to use a typeface called Stargaze. There's a lot of typefaces, as you know, in the world today. So many of them. This is one I just found off of a free site like 1001fonts.com or defont.com. And I'm just going to use this font. I found that it works very well for what I'm trying to do here. You saw it in the example. So I'm actually just going to jump back into my creative brief and say, okay, the first name is Nina Gates. So right here will be Nina Gates. Okay, doesn't have to be perfect, just kind of dropping it in here and just getting a very rough outline. Because this is called Red Robot, I'm going to make this a deep red. Something like here, doesn't have to be perfect. Great, there we go. And I'm going to shorten her name so she's just in this scene here. I'm going to hit Command D to duplicate and go to the next scene. Actually, I talked about how this scene would actually continue to scene to number 3 here. Right here where number 2 is. If you remember, if you go back in the video, I talked about something happening here. It's the same scene, but I want some additional movement to happen here. So we'll move in the next scene here. This is scene 3. Okay, we've got Nina. So the next name we need to pull up here is Gina Black. Gina Black. And like I said, I'm sorry if I'm going too fast for you here, but I'm trying to put in a lot of information in these videos. And I don't want to spend too much time. I know we have all got very limited schedules. There's that one. We hit Command D again, duplicate, bring up in here. And I believe the last name here was Toby Sykes. So Toby Sykes is the last name. So Toby-S-Y-K-E-S. There is Toby. And for Toby, I'm going to bring back in this element again. And actually, you know what? Let's just skip. Back that up. Let's just skip a name. It's not going to be so interesting if we see name, right? And then just graphics again. Because we start with graphic, name, graphic. So let's put a graphic in right here. I'm not sure what that's going to be yet. So we'll extend this one here. And that's where we cut to black right here. So it's fine if it just, okay, perfect. So there we go. Very basic setup. It's not so great yet, but it will be. Okay, so the next thing I need to do is bring in some texture. And so I have found this image that I absolutely love, and I'm going to bring it down here. And this is my texture, okay? I can scale it up. It's there. It doesn't need to be anything that's like, a lot of times you'll say, well, you're scaling it up 200%. That's going to look terrible. But remember, we're going for like a futuristic, glitchy kind of look. Um, and an analog look, and it doesn't need to look perfect, right? It just needs to be there. It needs to add something to our overall design, which that's what this is. So I'm just going to leave it at this point underneath everything, and there it is, okay? I'm also going to bring in a piece of footage to fill in this spot here, and I want this to be some code and something else. So there's a lot of different ways you can create code. You could create hacker text if you want to call it that. You could do something like I could create a new solid here and call this hacker text. If you've got a plugin called Universe from Red Giant, let's see here, where are we at? Hacker text. Okay, there's hacker text or screen text. There's all types of different text elements you could build here. If I solo this layer, hit B and N to preview just this area here, let's see if we got any hacker text going on here. So I could do something where I, simply select a preset, open up my presets here, and it's going to load up, and then I'm going to select a preset. So here's a bunch of presets, and I could just randomly select, let's say this first one here, and apply it, and I believe it's applied there. Turn up the scroll rate, reposition. Like I said, there's a thousand different ways you can make hacker text. This is just something Red Giants recently put in that's pretty cool. Make it scroll even faster. I want it to be really just crazy. And then text settings, I don't know. Let's just say, sure, those all work. So there's some random text. You can also do things where you could go to like a website, right? So I've got a website pulled up here called hackertype.net, and I've done this before where you just start typing, right? And I could screen capture this. So I could use a program like ScreenFlow or Camtasia, and you can just screen capture doing all this random code, recording this, and then you bring that recording back into After Effects, and you've got like some random code. So I'd probably start recording here because the scrolls, the text is moving upwards. It's more interesting. We simulated that with our hacker text here, but that's a different way you can do it. So to make it even more interesting, I'd probably duplicate this. I would probably, I don't know, offset this so it's in a different position, maybe somewhere like here, something like that. And if I preview this and turn off the audio, you're going to see we've got some interesting hacker text going on here. That's pretty cool. So I'm going to bring in one more element. And to this element, it's called Gridwall 5. This is from a product pack. Now, I'm not trying to get you to buy my product pack. This is something I made called Radical Retro Elements, which I'm really proud of. And it's just a pack with all these different elements to it. And it has a lot of really interesting textures, right? So this is like I said, called Gridwall 5. There's a bunch of these different grid walls. And we can do something like this and overlay it and, maybe set it to something like screen. And now we've got this hacker text going on with this stuff going on. So already, it's very interesting to see this, right? You're starting to see what I'm trying to do. I'm starting to layer some elements up and make the image more interesting. So I'm going to unsolo these. And now I've got this background, which it's hard to see this. But once we get a few more things going, you're going to see where I'm going with this. And I'm going to wrap this video up here in just a minute. But before I do, let's go ahead and just reverse this. So let's move the hacker text and grid wall background up. And let's move the second grid of text. Gina Black is here. Here we go there. So I'm going to hit N. At the beginning, hit B. Turn my audio back on. I'm just going to watch this back and see how things look. I mean, I know this does not look interesting at all yet, but it will. Watch. So the only thing hear is that I want this cut to black to happen a little bit later, about here with this last snare. So I'll extend this scene, play it again. Okay, and that's gonna do it for this video. I promise you. You're probably saying, okay, this looks terrible. How did he get from what I see now to this? And what you're seeing here, that's everything that we just did. That's the base, right? We've got the base in there. So now the next thing we're doing is the next video, we're going to move in and we're going to start adding some motion to this. We're going to add some 3D cameras to bring the motion, make the motion really come alive. We're also going to add some lights and some shadows and some things like that to give it a little bit more depth, right? To make it a little bit more interesting to see. We've got the basic building blocks of our design in there. Now we need to start adding some basic motion blocks, some basic camera motion and some lighting to really bring this thing to life. So that's coming up in the next video. It's coming to you real soon in the next few days. Until then, I want you to leave me a comment below or send me an email, hello@motionscience.tv. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have a question. Let me know what is it that you're wondering about the process we're moving through. Let me help answer those questions for you, and I can do that in some of the next videos. So stay tuned for the next video. Again, I'm Cameron with Motion Science. I'm so excited to have you here. I'm excited to have you watch the next several videos that are coming out to show you how to go from idea to execution. Until then, leave me a comment below, shoot me an email, let me know what you think.